Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Squad Room Podcast, the place for cops who want to transform their leadership, create more resilience, and generate more balance in their life. On this show, we cover the tactics and strategies you can use every day to create a life worth living, both in and out of uniform. My name is Garrett Teslaw, and I'm a full-time lieutenant for a sheriff's office in Southern California, and I'm glad you're with us today. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind you of a few things. First, if you're on social media, make sure you're following us at the Squad Room and that you've liked our Facebook page. Also, make sure to join our Facebook group. Just search the Squad Room group to join. But most importantly is that you head over to thesquadroom.net and get signed up for our mailing list. People on that list get exclusive access to free resource downloads and a weekly email from me on things you need to know about. I also send out content that's exclusive to that list, so don't miss out on something that can help you in your life or in your job. Join our list at thesquadroom.net. This episode is sponsored by officerprivacy.com. In the age of the internet, social media, and smartphones, there's so much amazing information at our fingertips. I can research any topic or person I want to and learn all about them, their family, and way more information than I really should be able to. The problem is, people can do that research on us too. Whether we like it or not, our information is on the internet, out there for people to find, even the bad guys. Just accepting this and doing nothing isn't an option. We as cops have a giant target on our back these days. Sometimes that's literal and it's life or death, and other times it's just dealing with potential harassment. Either way, we don't want to expose our families to these risks. Being careful about what you post on social media doesn't go far enough. It's easy for a bad guy with an iPhone and free Wi-Fi to hunt you down. That's why officerprivacy.com exists. My friend Pete James is the founder, and he spent 25 years in law enforcement here in California, using much of his career to hunt down the criminals and evidence on the computers and the internet that we now use. Pete knows how easy it is to find you, and since he's one of the good guys, he can help. OfficerPrivacy.com offers 2 packages to choose from to help you clean up your side of the internet. Their premium service allows you to sit back and let the professionals do the work, where they will work to scrub the internet's top 50 people search sites that can expose your home address. Then they work to maintain your privacy by monitoring those same sites. If you show up again, they will remove you again. They also offer an at-home solution for those of you that have the time and the technical ability to do it yourself. I don't, so that's why I use their premium service, but you can do it all yourself using their proprietary software. You can remove yourself and your family members from these same top 50 people search sites on the internet, and then use the software to conduct audits as often as you'd like to make sure that you haven't been added back. To learn more about how you can keep safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/the squad room. When you sign up through that link, you'll get a free USB data blocker, and your first month of monitoring is free. That's officerprivacy.com/the squad room. You know, whether you're the chief, a sergeant, a patrol officer, or anyone in between, one of the most time-consuming and frustrating parts of managing people is dealing with the schedule. From shift bids to overtime and special events, vacation requests, court overtime, and unexpected critical incidents and major disasters, the schedule is like a living, breathing beast that must be wrestled with at every level of an agency. If your agency is still living in the dark ages, running off an Excel spreadsheet, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's why I'm so impressed with InTime. InTime is designed specifically for public safety agencies, from police and sheriff's offices to corrections, dispatch, and fire agencies. Their cloud-based system and their smartphone app allow officers to access the system from anywhere to sign up for overtime, submit vacation requests, and get updated on court subpoenas. Their system is incredibly easy to use and only takes a few minutes, not hours, to understand and begin using. Major agencies like the Anaheim Police Department, Pittsburgh Police, Passaic County Sheriff's Office, CAL FIRE, and many others trust InTime to save them time and money. If you're interested in spending less time on scheduling, eliminating redundant and expensive overtime, increasing your compliance with subpoenas, and reducing the stress and fatigue on your employees, please, I beg of you, go to intime.com/the squad room to learn more about their system. Errol Doebler, welcome to the Squad Room. Thanks for being here.
Garrett, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
You've got a resume that immediately, I'll be honest, it's intimidating. You know, from one guy to another. I'll just put it out there right now. Pretty intimidating. But that's why I love this show. That's why I love having this podcast and having it from 2016, is I get to level up the conversations I have with people. And so we'll get into your story. And and components of your story as we talk about our theme for today. But before we begin, why don't you give everybody kind of the brief history of your experience and how you ended up where we are today, sitting here having this conversation?
Yep. So I'll let you know how I've reached the culmination of my career, which is being on your show and your
Yes,
podcast.
that's not.
This is it.
I guess that
Okay.
came out wrong. That's not what I
No,
meant.
no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It didn't come out wrong at all. Um, I am born and raised in New York, Long Island. Um, Went to college at the United States Naval Academy. Upon graduation from the Naval Academy, I was sent to a U.S. ship, USS Monongahela. That's a part of my resume that people don't always see, but it's something I'm proud of, right? Spent a couple of years on that ship, laterally transferred over to SEAL teams, where I was at SEAL Team 4 and SEAL Team 1. I got injured on deployment at SEAL Team 1, so I got medically discharged, which was a bummer because I wanted to spend my entire career in the SEAL teams. Moved into the private sector in sales and sales management. Had a sales meeting downtown New York City on September 11th, 2001. And so I was down there for that horrific event. And like most people, it kind of changed the trajectory of my career. I got myself medically cleared, which is a story in and of itself that everybody, especially our law enforcement friends with that good sense of humor, would appreciate, but that's maybe for another time. And then, I put my resume out to all the usual players, and FBI was the first one to come back. So I joined the FBI, worked out of the New York City office primarily, did international terrorism. I also did some Russian organized crime and some gang work. Got a little frustrated with the leadership and the culture at the FBI, which I know you've talked about on your podcast before, kind of some of the cultural challenges around law enforcement. And I just kind of decided at that point, I loved leadership. I felt like I had something to offer to people who cared and wanted to be better leaders. And I was either going to try to do something about what I was seeing that I didn't like, which didn't seem plausible at the time, or I could just keep my mouth shut and take it, or I could go out on my own. And so that's what I did. So after 13 years in the FBI, I left and I started Leader 193. And I've been doing this since 2016. And essentially all I did was develop a process of leadership that I think is important. It's a problem-solving process that's really applicable to anybody. For your audience, it's the patrolman or the lieutenant who's in charge of the huge things. It's all problem-solving, and that's where I am. That's where I am right now. So that's 30 odd years right there in a nutshell.
packed it in. There's some themes in your resume that I think I want to tease out because uh, what I want to focus on today, you've been in leadership positions from a very early age. You've chosen those things, and you've very much been one of the men in the arena, so to speak, right? But it takes uh, a, 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 a special kind of mix of a person to be able to do those things. And I think one of those things, and then this is what I want to talk about and have our the theme of the show be today, is about how we lead ourselves first before we can lead others.
Yep.
And going to the Naval Academy, even just applying to the Naval Academy, is in and of itself a leadership of one, or a leadership of yourself first, and then going to the fleet and then making that decision to go into special operations is another, because those are leaps, those are big leaps for anybody to decide to pursue,
Yep.
right? And then changing careers from the private sector into federal law enforcement after 9/11. I mean, that's 9/11 is how I ended up in law enforcement, even.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my one of my leaps, was leading myself to that and deciding I was going to do this. Um, what set you up early on in your life to be the kind of person that was willing to take those kind of leaps of faith in yourself early on?
That story goes back really, really far, and I tell this story once in a while. But I played hockey growing up. I started when I was 4 years old. For some reason, my dad thought that was a good idea to put me in hockey at 4 years old. But this is, you know, I'm pretty old, And, that was back when in youth hockey, that fighting was a 5-minute penalty, so you could be 6 years old, scrap and get thrown in the box. Anyway, I think I was about 7 or so, and ended up being the captain of the team. And my dad came up to me before the game. He says, "What are you going to say to the boys?" And I said, what are you talking about? What am I going to say to the boys? And he goes, "You're the captain. You're the leader of this team. They expect to hear from you. What are you going to say?" I was 7. I don't remember what I said when I went in there, but I do remember it was super uncomfortable. And I remember my dad came in the locker room and watched, because I said I was going to do it. But what I even remember back then was, holy cow, that's impactful. People do expect to hear from somebody. And that just stayed with me. And I kind of took that responsibility very seriously at that young age. And then when you do something at that young age, it becomes a habit, and that just kind of becomes who you are. That was probably the first really hard thing that I did from an emotional standpoint, but I saw the impact. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was kind of, that was kind of how I started on this path towards, wow, to do something, you've got to dig deep first and figure out what's going on inside of you before you actually execute. I remember being terrified.
Mm-hmm. What I hear in that too is you had a father who saw you as a leader. And
well, yeah, I think I don't know. I never really. That's a good point, because I never really asked him why he did that, other than the fact that I know he respected the value of great leadership. That I do know.
and then moving into, applying for the military for Annapolis, the Naval Academy, and then pursuing that. Um, what was your decision there, and how did you? I mean, that's a very competitive process. It's a lot of hoops to jump through.
Yeah.
What was your decision making in, like, yeah, I can do this?
So, from going into the Naval Academy,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was kind of an interesting story as well. Our neighbors were Naval Academy people, right? The dad went there, and one of the sons went there. The other son was in the military as well. And they bought over, and I was much younger than them. So I couldn't have been more than 10 or so, 12 when this happened. They just bought over a kind of a book on the Naval Academy, right? It's a kind of marketing material. And it went through, and it's super cool when you're that young, looking at the uniforms and all this stuff. And back then, and like I said, this might have been 1980. You can't find what you can now on the Navy SEALs, like, because there was nothing. And there was this little paragraph on this thing called the Navy SEALs, and the picture in it wasn't even a cool picture. It was like 8 guys in those little goofy shorts, with no shirts on, and just kind of hanging out, looking cool. And the description of what they did was very nebulous. But I remember going, "Who are these guys, and what aren't they saying in this paragraph?" Fast forward, the military never came up, right? And I'm in high school, I'm in senior year, and I played lacrosse. That was kind of my primary sport. I was going to go to college for lacrosse. And me and my coach started talking, and I said, I got to figure out where I'm going to go. And he said, "Well, where do you want to go? Because I'll call the coach." And, again, I was a lacrosse player. I didn't say Hopkins. I didn't say Syracuse. I didn't say Maryland. All the, normal places a lacrosse player would want to go from Long Island. For some reason, I just spit out the Naval Academy. And he goes, "Okay, I'll call the coach." And the coach came down, recruited me. And I got to go into the prep school, where they generally would put athletes. So I didn't have to go through that whole nomination process. They get a certain amount of slots. And then if you graduate from the prep school, then you get an automatic appointment. And that was it. Now, once I got to the Naval Academy, once I got to the Naval Academy prep school, I remembered this whole Navy SEAL thing. And then that became my obsession. But it wasn't an obsession growing up. But I always count that little book that I read and that little article on the SEALs that hardly said anything at all. It's always just sticking in the back of my brain. When the moment of truth came to say, where do I want to go to college? I just said, the Naval Academy. I had never even talked about it before that. So that's kind of how I got there.
It's interesting, Uh, so, you've held these leadership positions now, basically since your late teens, really, right? Like, and
Hmm.
eventually, you left the SEALs as a platoon commander, right?
Yep.
Is that
Yep.
right?
Yep.
For Team 4, and um, then going out on your own, and then being with the FBI, and you're on the FBI SWAT team
Yep.
in New York, and obviously engaged in some high level stuff there. Uh, Transitioning to our theme of leading ourselves. The first key component I see of being able to lead yourself, and why that's important is, you can't lead others before you really know how to lead yourself, or you can't do it effectively anyway. But
Yep.
to me, self-awareness is really like the foundation, the bedrock of being able to lead yourself and then lead others. Do you must have some sort of self-awareness practice, or some sort of routine, or something you do to or maybe you don't, it's something totally different, I don't know, but what's your practice when it comes around that idea of self-awareness? And that can be a very broad idea. It doesn't,
No, it's not. It's actually exactly what I do, and I don't want to make this our discussion of running commentary on my leadership business, but it is applicable to your question,
Sure.
because what I did was when I left, I had to put together when I left the FBI, right? And I was going to start this consulting business. I had to put together very clearly, what do I believe, right? I can't, right? I've got to have something that I believe in, that I'm going to sell to people and convince them, trust me with your development as
Hmm.
a leader. And I went back through the areas in my life when things went really well and when things went really poorly. Okay. And I tried to discern what was the difference. Okay. And what I came up with very quickly was the difference was in those areas where things went well. They ironically were in the most dangerous parts of everything that I've ever done, to include combat in Afghanistan, where I was attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment as an FBI agent. Um, and it always came down to, I remember being wholly aware of how I was feeling at the time, and wholly aware of what my intuitive reaction was going to be to that emotion, and then being wholly aware of how I needed to act in that situation. So, for example, whatever's happening right now, whether it was the first time I jumped out of an airplane for a free fall jump, first time I went on a combat operation, whatever it was, I remember thinking, this is scary. I'm scared. Okay. And that's okay. My intuitive reaction I knew about myself was, when I get scared, I get overly aggressive. Naturally a pretty aggressive guy. Okay. So I don't need over aggression. And that over aggression usually leads to mistakes. So I would able to rein myself in and say, okay, what you need to do is get calm. You need to dial it back like 100. That is going to just be a good, natural, aggressive position for me. So basically, it was conscious decision making along the way. And then always, what's my plan, right? And that's just the planning process we learned in the SEAL teams, right? Then I would always go, okay, where are we? What's the plan? Blah, blah, blah. What's my personal plan inside the bigger plan? Okay. And so I was like, yeah, I went through that thought process every single time as I reflected when things went well. And again, they were usually in the most dire circumstances. When didn't things go well? Usually in my personal life, when I wouldn't go through that process and I would act overly emotionally in some situation, it would cause a bad situation to get worse. And now I'm having to explain my way out of it. Okay. I got in big trouble. Maybe I told an officer to go F himself because that's just what I did. He said something to make me upset. I didn't think there was a dire situation, so I just acted on it, and that was my response, right? I'm a New Yorker. That's what we do. Um, and that usually took a lot of work to get myself out of, right? Um, so it was that's the process. That's the process that I did without even knowing it. It's the process that I recognized upon reflection, And it's the process that, in my view, is the problem solving process for everything. And if you do it for yourself first, to your point and the theme of our discussion, once you do that for yourself, then and only then are you going to have the capacity to see those same things in the people that you're leading and be able to make those adjustments.
That's really interesting to me because these, I think the ability to do an after action on your life at various stages is absolutely crucial. I just went through another one myself and spent tons of time journaling and thinking and like walking and just kind of flushing out ideas and recognizing those signposts for me as well,
Yep.
and seeing new ones. And it strikes me you had some of that skill early on, and I wonder, coming out of, as a high level uh, athlete in high school, and then into the teams and then the FBI. What I see inconsistently in all of those is that you have a culture of an after action review of some sort.
Yep.
In sports, you watch tape or you review the performance of the week before. And one of the best benefits of it, perhaps, is that you get comfortable reviewing the actions that you've already done to look at what you could do better. Do
Yep.
you think that came from that?
Well, I think it's a natural extension of the process, right? So the one element that I didn't include, I put in my process, is this thing we call the resistance, right? Lots of people use that term, and I just simply use it when I gave you the example of, right, there's always a trigger, there's always emotion, there's always an established behavior you fall back on as an individual, right? If you recognize that, you can execute a behavior you want, you make a plan, right? We all go through that in one way or another, usually unconsciously. But then what we always do is we reflect, right? Whether we do it consciously or not, we always think back, how did that go? Well, that went bad. Now, we may end up making excuses. We may end up justifying bad behavior, but it's still a reflection. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when I realized that is still part of the natural process, I said, okay, how do we include that? And essentially all it became was an after action report. Make sure your reflection on what happened is honest. Now, the beauty about understanding the elements of this little decision-making process I just went through is, if you know what they are, if you know everything's driven by an emotion, and there's an intuitive action to that emotion, and on it goes, when you reflect back and you say, I don't like how that ended up, you get to now go back to each one of those elements and say, what didn't I account for? What did I skip? Oh, you know what? Right out of the gate, I just acted overly emotional, right? And then I made a plan, which might have been a good plan, but it was based on something overly emotional. Now that's a good plan to do a bad thing, okay? And so that reflection part absolutely has to be there, okay? Again, we do it whether we realize it or not. We're just not always as honest with ourselves as we need to be. So, and it could get, for me, I make a lot of mistakes. And, I apply this stuff to my home life, right? With my wife, right? You talk about personal leadership. I'm the man in the family, and I know that's maybe not a popular thing to say anymore, but in this family, I'm looked at as the leader. Now, my wife really runs the show, but at least she lets me believe I'm in charge. So every time her and I have a disagreement, every time we just have an interaction and that feeling is, ugh, you just get one of those. And especially when it's in front of the kids, even if it's just subtle, they'll pick up on the vibe. And I make sure I after action, right? That's personal leadership. And I go, okay, what just happened? I got mad at something completely irrelevant. I acted in a way that took it out on her. That's why we had this silly interaction. Now I've got to go back. I've got to swallow humble pie. I've got to put my ego aside and go, hey, I'm sorry about that. That was my fault. I acted on something, blah, 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 whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like I do nothing but that, because I am constantly stepping on these landmines I set for myself at home. But it becomes a little bit easier every time. And you start doing that enough, you start going, I'm tired of apologizing. I now have to make the adjustment to get it right, because at some point, she's not going to accept this apology anymore, right? And then to have my kids watch me humble up and say, apologize to their mother because I was overly emotional, and then upon reflection. So yeah, that's a long answer to that self-reflection, that reflection part of the internal leadership process. Invaluable, absolutely necessary, as long as it's done honestly.
Yeah. So I wonder, because that was a nice transition into that second point of self-evaluation. I say, um, of being where you're at, but I want people to understand, or it's important to me, I think, that self-evaluation is not the same as self-criticism.
No.
And that in your review, when you went through your life and you like what worked and what didn't, um, for any of us who do those kinds of things, and like I just said, I just went through one of those myself. There's a real danger in wallowing in your quote unquote failures if you look at them as failures rather than as lessons to learn from and an opportunity to do something different the next time.
Yep.
Do you think that's appropriate? Or do you think that we should be harsh on ourselves in terms of what we did in the past as a motivator to do it differently?
Yeah, I think there's several parts to that. First of all, on the whole, I agree with you. But where I would break it down is this: is we're allowed to be self-critical. Okay, we are allowed to say, I just did something and that was really stupid. We can't pretend when we don't do stupid things, because we do. You're allowed to
Right.
say that. What you're not allowed to do is beat yourself to a bloody pulp. And that's it. I'm
Right.
the
Right.
dumbest person in the world. No, man, I did something really stupid just then, right? And it's essentially what I just described with my wife, the scenario with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
just did something stupid. Okay, I feel bad about it. That was wrong. I'm allowed to have that criticism of myself.
Right.
Okay, but now what? Reflect, be honest. What's the adjustment? Okay, the adjustment is go and apologize like a man. Okay, say where it came from. Don't spread blame. That's it. And then keep that in your back pocket. So again, we don't keep it in our back pocket to bloody ourselves. We keep it in our back pocket to say, I recognize this. I remember when I did that last time. This is how I was feeling, and this is how I acted. Do not do it again. Now you have no excuse, because right, you're reflecting back on adjustments that you're making. So I think where people go wrong with that self-reflection process is either they say, I'm not allowed to be critical of myself because I've got to show myself self-love. Self-love is important. Okay. It's critical. Okay. But that doesn't mean you're not allowed to be critical of yourself. And I'm going to be critical of myself, and I'm going to beat myself to death and never let myself recover.
Yeah.
Right? We're in the middle. Being critical is good. Being objective and unemotional about what you do about that now, and being aware and conscious of that
Mm-hmm.
perhaps instinctive behavior that now you have to watch out for in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great a description of the difference that I was trying to get at,
Mm-hmm.
uh, somewhat poorly, but that you can judge your actions and you can evaluate your actions and you can make changes to your actions, but that doesn't mean that you, like you say, don't beat yourself up, don't self-flagellate for days on this. Like it's an opportunity to change, it's an opportunity to grow or be something different, but it doesn't mean that you are bad. It means that
Nope.
maybe the decision was bad.
The
But
decision was bad.
yeah.
Right. There are, as we know in law enforcement, there are true bad people out there, right? Like who are just, they're bad. The majority of us are not that. We just make mistakes. We do dumb things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have bad decisions, and, you know, we have to start checking ourselves if it's the same bad decision over and over. Okay. But again, if we start embracing what we just discussed, that won't happen. Again, critical of what I did. What's the unemotional and methodical adjustment to it, right? And let me just keep it long enough so I remember that emotion that drove me to that action that I didn't like. So next time it happens, because it will happen again, I'll be on it. And I can
Mm-hmm.
go a different direction, a conscious direction, an aware direction. That direction still might not work out, but at least you're getting to conscious decisions now, not just knee jerk decisions. And then you can continue to make behavioral adjustments along the way.
It's a great transition to what I think is another component of leading self, which is goal setting and then choosing the right goals. So we have a goal of choosing a behavior that's different the next time, right? That's one goal that we could
Yep.
have. But how does just goal setting in general relate to you in terms of how you lead yourself?
Yeah, I think so. And that's a really, it's a, again, I think a really nuanced and multi-layered discussion. Goals are important. You're in business. I want to make $1 million. I think there's got to be something like that, right? In law enforcement, I want to have my own unit, right? I want to, whatever. I want to win Patrolman of the Year, right? Whatever. I think those are good. Okay, I do. They're important. But from my view, what needs to come next is then what's the set of behaviors that you need to establish that if you behave in these ways, you'll get to that goal. Okay. So when I set goals, I generally, that's what I do, right? There's a thing I want to achieve for myself or for my family, but then I immediately go to what are the behaviors I need to focus on. So for my business right now, okay, we've got a financial goal for the year. And what I said to myself is everything I do, I need to show discipline, I need to prioritize, okay, and I need to be consistent. If I'm disciplined, if I prioritize the right things and I'm honest about what I'm doing, right, and is that the right priority? And if I'm consistent with that behavior, will I get to our financial goal? Right? The answer is, I think, yes. So that's how I that's how I try to do it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I recommend people try to do it. Because again, we can have a goal of making $1 million in the year. We can have a goal of being patrolman of the year or whatever it is. Okay, but if we don't establish a good set of behaviors, good personal culture, we're just not going to get there. Okay, we're going to take shortcuts. We're going to take a roundabout way. We're just going to do things that are random.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we've got in our house, we've got I'm looking at the sign right now. Leave things better than you found them, right? And we've got, the kitchen, the family, your body, the community, right? Leave things better than you found them. That's a behavior we try to implement in our house. And if we do that, because the goal is for us to have a loving and happy environment, right? The goal for us is to teach our kids good values. If we behave in that way, if we try to leave everything a little better than we found it, will we achieve that? I think we will. So again, that's just a kind of a personal example of how we try to implement that goal setting. But it's you're going to get a million different opinions if you talk to a million different people on goal setting. So I don't know if that makes sense or
It
what you
makes
think of
total
that.
sense. It makes total sense. And it's actually very much in alignment with what I kind of preach on the show, what I call front sight focus, to use an analogy of firearms, because that's something that's easily transferable to our
Mhm.
audiences. Yeah, we need those further goals downrange, which would be your target necessarily,
Yep.
you could say.
Right. I got to make
Uh,
the arrest. I got to break this thing. Yeah. The whole thing.
but if for people who haven't heard me talk about this yet, for me, front sight focus is I have a goal downrange, but that's not where my focus is, right? Because using, I guess, with iron sight, like nowadays with all the newer people, RMRs and red dots, this analogy might have to go away sometime soon. But for me, if I am my rear sights of my
Mhm.
firearm, right, me
Yep.
myself, my brain, and I want to hit a target downrange, I can't do that by focusing on the target. I have to look through my front sights, and that front sight is the next right thing to do.
Yep.
Like that's, and then the next right thing after that, right? And so, um, it's you're talking about very process oriented goal setting. Like, what's the next right thing, and what's the
Yep.
thing that has to happen right in front of me? And it was something that I learned from, particularly from, like, I'm not a football fan, but Nick Saban from Alabama teaches this, to his players. Don't focus on winning the game. Don't focus on winning at the Rose Bowl. Focus on your not even your next route, but where you place your foot,
Right.
at the line. And what's the next right thing? So front sight focus. So that's very much in alignment with what I try to practice and what I certainly try to preach here on the show.
Yeah, the Nick Saban example is a good one, right? He focuses on the process, and just so let's just let's just use the three things that I said that I use for my own personal behaviors to get to our company financial goal, right? Discipline in everything I do, prioritization, and consistency. So what I would say in response to that, again, from a leadership perspective, and using that Nick Saban thing, right? Focus on the process, right? Do this drill well. If somebody is doing the drill wrong, if somebody doesn't set up their split isn't appropriate, right, or whatever it is, I'll bet, or at least if I was there, I would say I would go to the behavior. Hey Garrett, check your split. Explain to me how that's showing discipline in everything you do. I'm not reprimanding him necessarily for the split. I'm reprimanding him for not doing the behavior. That if he just thought every time, discipline in everything I do, consistency. Right now, I'm stepping up to the line. What's the priority? Making sure my split is right. Okay? Behave in these ways, you'll get better. And that's, I think, endemic to, is it endemic, right? To your analogy of Nick Saban. I think that's the same thing. What is the process? The process has got to begin. If you don't think Nick Saban says we're winning the national championship this year every year, I'm sure he does. But then he goes right to, but here's the first thing: process. So, yeah, I think we're on the same page, at least how we feel about the addressing of goals.
Absolutely. And the one part of goals that I struggle with is the one you just talked about, which is discipline. And that's a very common topic for former SEALs to talk about these days, right? It's like the quintessential thing. And I think there's probably someone out there listening who's like, well, yeah, of course he's disciplined. He was in the teams and they gave it to him, right? I know that's not true. You've already told us your history where there was discipline before and after, but a lot of people are looking for and I've done this too. I've absolutely done this even not that long ago. Like I've looked for a way to give myself an excuse not to be disciplined, and how, if someone's coming to you and say, I want to be a leader. I want to lead myself. I want to set the right goals, but I struggle with the discipline part. And to me, the answer of just be more disciplined isn't really an answer. Like, nope. Where's the nuance in that?
Yep.
After the riots and unrest of the summer of 2020, I began to get increasingly concerned about the fact there's so much of my life that is out there accessible to the public. And yes, I know that I'm a public figure in some sort of way, but even then, it still makes me uncomfortable. And I've been trying to figure out where the line should be drawn between what is shared on this podcast or on social media or in interviews I give and what should remain private for the security and safety of my family. Even though I'm a public person, that doesn't mean I want my personal information out there for the bad guys to find. I've arrested enough of them in my career that it makes me nervous to think that my family could be exposed to those dangers. Not long ago, a suspect showed up at the front door of my partner's house, 45 miles away from the station. I've had enough of worrying about it and felt completely outmatched by the internet. I mean, it's the internet. Trying to take my name off of Google seems insurmountable, and I learned that, honestly, it is. But there's a lot that we can do to protect ourselves, and that's removing our names from people's search sites and breaking the links between our home address and our names. I learned all this from my friends at officerprivacy.com, who are helping me to clean up my side of the internet. A quick Google search shows just a shocking amount of information about where I live, where I used to live, my family members, their names, their addresses, and even phone numbers. We need help protecting ourselves from the bad guys. You have partners on your beat, so get a partner on the internet. To learn more about how they can keep you safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/the squad room. When you sign up through that link, you'll get a free USB data blocker, and your first month of monitoring is free. That's officerprivacy.com/the squad room.
Everything you're throwing is right in my wheelhouse, Garrett. I really appreciate it because I love this.
Just teeing these up for you, man. Just teeing these up.
Literally teeing it up. We spoke for 30 seconds before we got on this thing. But so here's where it is, right? So being a Navy SEAL, right now, Jocko Willink is a very popular Navy SEAL, and he's earned it. Okay, he does
absolutely.
He does a great job, and I think his company is probably a great company, and I enjoy their books. So that being said, I get the question a lot from people I am trying to work with. Well, are you like Jocko? And I say, well, I'm probably like Jocko in the sense that we were both Navy SEALs and we've learned the same things growing up. And I said, but here's where I would distinguish myself from what my company, Leader 193, does and maybe what their company does. And this could be, I'm using him as an example. It could be anybody, right? I'm not comparing myself to him.
He's the most well-known, the
He's
most
the
obvious.
most well-known, right? So I think the principles in their book are prioritize, keep it simple, and decentralize, right? I think those are the three things. And what I would tell people is, yeah, those are great behaviors to adopt. The only problem with them is they may not be specifically the behaviors that you need, right? There may be something you're doing that it won't allow you to show discipline, prioritize, or decentralize, right? Whatever it is. It may be a lack of emotional awareness, right? So what I like to tell people is we've got to go through a process first before we start identifying behaviors. That process begins with the emotional awareness. So when I work with somebody, we hammer away for a week, every day. Get on the app, tell me what you're feeling randomly 4 times a day. Any emotion, doesn't matter what it is, right? They're starting to figure out, wow, I didn't realize I got so insecure or so angry all the time. What's next? What's the intuitive action? What do you do based on those emotions? This is a very hard drill. Tell me what you're doing every day. Well, what do you mean? I'm sending a text message or I'm changing my socks. You want to know that? I say, well, maybe. I said, but what we're ultimately going to do is draw a conclusion. We're going to draw a conclusion about what you do and what is your personal culture. You may procrastinate, right? You may talk past each other. You may be overly sarcastic. You may act randomly without planning. Okay. The second I can help people see what their current culture is based on what they do, right? And if they say, you know what, Errol, you're right. I don't prioritize. I say, well, give me the 5 things you can explain to me that led you to that conclusion. And they'll do it. They're like, oh, I didn't do this, 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 and this. Boom. Now what they've done is they've seen behaviors that they're successful in spite of. And now what we say then is, great. What behaviors do you want to adopt to mitigate or get rid of what you just described? Now, it's usually the opposite behavior, right? I don't prioritize. I need to start prioritizing. Why does this process matter? Because what happens is the person identifies it themselves. It's theirs. It's not me telling you, here are the 3 things you need to do. They may be right in general. There might be something more important, at least for the short term, that you need to work on. So, as I expand this out to a never-ending monologue, you say, I have trouble with discipline. Great. I would say to you, we got to go to the beginning. Convince yourself discipline is the problem. Because if you convince yourself discipline is the problem based on emotions and how you act on those emotions and what you've established your personal culture to be, and you go, yeah, it's just discipline. Great. Every day before you do something now, going forward, say, am I being as disciplined as I can? Am I being as disciplined as I can? That's it. That's your mantra, and it's got context. And that's the most important thing, I think, for these behaviors. They should have context. So I'm not even sure what question I was answering, but you just teed it up for me, and I
No, you absolutely answered it, and I'm loving this because, like you said, we talked for 30 seconds before we started. I didn't tell you what the topic was for today about my theme, what I wanted, and which is leading yourself. And so I'm asking very specific questions, for myself, but I also know that everyone else struggles with this too. And so these are all hitting those points. Um, what I've found and doing my own, like we talked about earlier, the after action review, and something that I try to remind people of is and I'm talking to myself, I guess, here in this sense, but to others, you are disciplined. You are incredibly disciplined, just not in the ways that you think you have to be or that are obvious to you. Like I went through the police academy, which was, granted it's not buds, but it was very much my version of buds at that time in my life. It was definitely the hardest thing I
It
could have done.
requires discipline to go through the police academy. Right.
Right. And then 17 years in law enforcement, having a successful career and promoting
Yes.
up. Those things require discipline. Having a good relationship with my wife and kids, those things require discipline. All the way down to little things like, I not I'm a speeder. I don't know why that popped in my house. Like, not breaking the law, but like I break the law every day when I get on the 101. But like, I have a set of right and wrong values, right? My values to me are my discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of cops out there think, oh, I'm not disciplined, but they're very value centric or value oriented people. That is discipline. That is part of your discipline. So it is there. It is a skill you have, but you just need to cultivate that in another part of your life, but it's not absent. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. And I think, again, from speaking to your audience, right, a law enforcement audience, and probably a military audience as well, and there is what I've found, even upon reflection. So when I told you, how did I develop my process, right? The process I developed was, boy, in these really dangerous situations, I was spot on, right? When I would, and what was I doing? Well, it was always work related, right? I was always in character, whether it was in the SEAL teams, whether it was, in the FBI, whether it was SWAT team, whether it was in combat, right? I very rarely look back on an incident and go, you just randomly acted there, because I had the discipline and the love for that job. What I think will resonate is, especially with the cops out there, right? When we get off the job, all of a sudden, all that stuff goes out the window, right? Just all of a sudden now we're hitting the bar, and instead of just having a couple of drinks and getting home, oh crap, it's 3 a.m, right? I've been there, I've done it. It's like, what just happened? How I speak to people, right? When I told you, get myself in trouble because I told a senior officer to go F himself because I was not maintaining a discipline in every aspect of my life. So again, what I try to help people with in that, and everybody listening here, guys and girls, because I know what's happening because I've been there. I used to run triathlons, right? And everybody focuses on the swim, the bike, and the run. And what I started to realize was I needed to start focusing on the transition. That is also a race. Once I get out of the water, what am I doing from there to right before I get on the bike? It's a transition. It was a discipline early on in my, I wasn't a career racer, but, I would care about my times. And it was a discipline that I didn't have. I'm like, oh, this is kind of my rest time. And then you net it out. You're like, well, I could have shaved 5 minutes off my total time, which would have moved me from 11th to 3rd. Okay. So what is my point? If this is what we're focused on, right? If this is what we're concerned about, the lack of consistency and discipline, where's your transition? Everything needs to be a transition. I'm getting off duty. I am now immediately transitioning to what discipline do I need to execute now? Okay, I'm going to go meet the boys and girls at the local spot. We're going to have a couple of drinks, all good. But my discipline is I'm leaving after an hour and a half. That's it. That's my discipline. I'm calling my wife or my husband going, right? I'm being honest. I'm going to have a couple of drinks. I'm going to be good. Don't worry about me driving home. But the whole thing. Then when I get home, new transition. I am now leaving my car, and now I am the father, the husband, right? Whatever it is. What is my discipline now? Not to bring my work home with me, to make sure I ask, how's everybody doing today? Let me sit and listen to your day, because that's what a good father does. Transition, discipline and transition. When people start to look at it that way, you're chopping up your life, all of a sudden it doesn't become quite so hard to be disciplined in everything, because you're constantly asking yourself, okay, what's my new thing going on here? What's my transition? What discipline do I need to execute right here?
That's such a fantastic analogy.
It
And I mean,
works. It
so many,
works.
so many things in that are clicking for me with, how with the struggles we have around it, which often result from bleeding the demands on our time, or what we think we need to do, letting those things bleed into other parts of our life, and then feeling it's so insurmountable or it's too much that we just don't even know where to start, and then we end up not doing anything, versus this idea of
That's right.
transition, which goes back to the goals of what's the next right thing or what's the process. But man, I think that's spot on, and I got a lot out of that.
It's
um
and it's so and it even may be because again, with the audience we're talking to right now, there's a lot of stress, okay, and there's a lot of commitment, right? You become a law enforcement officer because something brings you there. You don't do it for the money, and you're
mhm.
certainly not doing it for the glory these days, right?
Right.
But you're doing
Right.
it for some reason, and there's an incredible amount of pressure you put on yourself, and so the discipline in that transition might even be good because it almost sounds like I'm suggesting you should be on your game at all times. No, you are transitioning from your car to your home and you can't shed it, right? That day beat you down. Your boss is making you crazy, this, that, or the other things, whatever it is. The discipline is still, right, going in. And for me, right, wife, I had a terrible day and I'm about to bring all this to bear. Can I get an hour? Can I get an hour? That is a form of discipline, right? to at least acknowledge, man, if you ask me to do something right now that's family oriented, I am going to mess it up to the worst degree. Now, she might say, no, you need to figure it out because the kids are crazy and I've been with them all day. Get them calmed down, go take your hour after. That's fair. I can try to make that, okay, but it's still, that's a new transition. So I don't want to make it sound like I think everything should be, oh, I'm going to be disciplined. So in this transition and everything's going to be great. No. Sometimes it's the discipline to say, I'm off. I am so off. And help me out here. Bear with me or something.
Well, yeah, and what I hear in that is, because I did triathlons for a little bit too, and when you're in the transitions, you have to be thinking about the tools you need for the next part, right? Like, so you come out of the pool, and if you run over, and the bike is next in a triathlon, if you run over and instead of grabbing your bike, you grab your running shoes and your running shorts, and then hop on the bike,
Right.
you're not going to be as effective as if you had gotten the right tools together in the right sequence to get on the bike. And then the same when you transition from the bike to the run, if you tried to run that course in your bike shoes, you're not in the right tools for the next part of that race. And so when we get home or when we do anything, I think that's a great idea of what tools do I need internally. I'm going to need my patience because I'm going to come in the door and the kids are going to be all over me. Or my wife has had a long day herself and I need to have some empathy. That's one of my tools that I need transitioning to this next part. That's what I got out of that. Not that you have to be disciplined at any time.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's so, and discipline was just the word we were using, right? Because it is a
Yeah.
good word, but it's also a very nuanced word. What
It's
does it
loaded.
mean?
It's got a bit loaded. Yeah.
It's right, and it's not right. And I'm sure anybody who promotes be disciplined would agree with what we're saying, right? That's
Yeah.
just kind of their forward-facing thing. I'm sure when they're working with clients, the nuance is there, right? So let's make
Mm-hmm.
that perfectly clear. But we talk about the behaviors. So when I'm trying to help people, right, or let's just say organizations, right, establishing your culture. In my view, establishing the organizational culture goes through the same exact process I told you about. Now you're looking at your team. What emotions are prevalent out there? In law enforcement, it's probably a lot of emotion, a lot of anger, a lot of pissed off because we have a high level for what we want to achieve. And the boss won't let me do this. The bureaucracy won't let me do this. And everybody's just pissed, right? Um, so I have to be able to see that as a boss and say, okay, what do we need to establish? And what's happening when people are getting pissed? Okay. What they're doing is they're gossiping, they're bad mouthing, and they might be right, but now that's becoming our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now I've got to decide as the leader, based on what I've seen, here's how we're going to behave. There's no more bad mouthing. It does not matter what the decision is. Here's what we'll do, because here's what I've observed, folks. And so now here's the behavior that I demand. The behavior is professionalism at all level, no bad mouthing randomly, that type of thing. Will that make us better? Yes, it will. Will it be hard? Yes, it will. So culturally, we can do that. But what I also tell people, that assignment of behaviors doesn't always have to be this big, broad-based behavior. Like you said, it can be very situational. I'm walking into something, I've got to go through my process quick. I walk into the house and it's mayhem like it normally is. And because I have 3 young kids, and I've got to say, and then I look over at my wife and she's doing this, right? And I say, right, the behavior I need right now is empathy and patience. Boom, right on the spot, right? That doesn't need to be something that I need to be thinking about in totality all the time, although we should, but it's never really for me, let's just say it's never really a big factor. But in this moment, those are the things I have to focus on. Okay. And again, I think that's to your point, right? It's not necessarily discipline. It's what's the behavior, and it can be very situational as well.
The next kind of key component of leading yourself, I think, is, at least from that I have found to be very true, is eliminating negativity or negative people from your life whenever possible.
Yeah.
And that can be a very hard thing when those people are family members. Yep. Or kind of that group. But also, we go to, just like you, high performing teams, or any team, high performing, not like, you may not always have a choice of who you're assigned with, or what squad you're on, or what rotation you got, or what sergeant you got. So acknowledging that a lot of this can be out of our control.
Yep. What
we can do is take control of the times that we can, and eliminate the negative people in our lives. How does that ring true for you as something, or do you say you just got to deal with it?
No, and that is such a hard topic, especially when it comes to family. So let's start with the easy ones, right? The regular people in your life. Now, look, you've got to establish for yourself who you want to be, what kind of person you are, right? What kind of behavior you bring to bear. And so let's just say it's a person of empathy and compassion, right? Those are good behaviors to say, if I had to define myself and who I am, right? I don't say I'm a father, or I'm a Navy SEAL, I'm a cop, because those things can be taken from you, right? Whether you like it or not. And if that's who you define yourself as, and all of a sudden you're not, then what are you? But nobody can ever take away from you if you say, well, I'm a person of compassion and empathy in everything I do. They can't take that away from me. Okay, so that's the first thing in understanding, in my view, who should be in your life and not. Now, you're with people who are the opposite of that, and all of that should give you an icky feeling. Okay, now if they're just random people, if they're just friends, even if they're old friends, okay, people move on, people change, people evolve. Okay, and that's good. Some people don't. It is your fault if you don't move yourself away from that environment. You don't need to be a part of it. It's not making you better. It's not allowing you to be who you've decided you want to be. That's the easy one. When it comes to family, you've got a harder decision to make, okay? And I would be lying if I said that sometimes perhaps there are some family members that you shouldn't distance yourself from, just simply because they are not adding the influence in your life, the totality of your life. It's actually setting you back. That doesn't mean that they don't get the extra benefit of the doubt. It doesn't mean you don't put the extra effort in, right? It doesn't mean you don't do everything in your power to make sure that you don't have to do that to a family member. But that's a decision that we're going to have to make, right? I would never encourage somebody to cut out a family member. I would just put them through the process. Are they a significant detriment and drag to how you want your and your family life to be? If they are, just hanging on to them because they're your cousin, you're going to regret that, right? Because you've got bigger responsibilities. When it comes to work, that type of thing, in my view, goes back to the leadership. There needs to be, you're partnered with somebody who you don't get along with. They're toxic. They're doing all those things. And they just get to behave however they want. There's not much you're going to be able to do from a partner standpoint, right? You have no authority over them. You can say, I wish you wouldn't do that. Or maybe, do you think we could handle this a little bit? You can do all that, try. But they have every right to go, shut up, man. Don't tell me how to be. I'll do it. This is how I've always done it, right? Look, I'm okay. All right, fair enough. Where's the leader, right? If the leader's not setting the guidelines and giving somebody some ammunition, right, to make a point. So again, we decide as a unit that we plan before we do anything, right? Doesn't matter if we're going to go knock on a door, right? We want to sit down 5 minutes, make a plan, okay? That's how we do things around here. I'm the boss. That's how I say we do it. That's my call, and here's why. It's in context. And now your partner's like, let's go knock on that door. And you go, well, hold on, slow down. Let's get a little plan together. Oh, forget that. That's stupid. Hold on, man. The boss has said it a million times. It's how we do business, okay? Whether we agree with it or not, if something goes wrong, he's going to ask us what our plan was. And I'm not going to lie to him and say we made a plan. I'm going to say, you wouldn't make a plan, and I had to follow you. I wasn't going to let you go alone. Whatever it is. That sounds petty, but I think when it comes to those individual relationships at work, it comes down to the boss. It comes down to the leader setting the right tone, to giving everybody a baseline to go to. So if somebody is so outside the lines of what the established behaviors that make up your culture are, give somebody a chance to go, hey, man, that's not how we do business on this squad. You know it and I know it. I'm not doing that, okay? Otherwise, you're in a pickle. I don't know. Does that? So I broke it up into 3 different areas.
No, yeah, it's great. I think I actually just released a whole episode on this about dealing with negative people at work. But I think the 2 key ones I'll share here. People can listen to that whole episode if they want. But just is to protect your own thoughts. I say sometimes protect your thoughts like your sidearm. We all practice weapon retention. We often don't practice attitude retention. And to set boundaries. Like, hey, man, I'm more than happy to have these conversations with you, ABC, but I'm not going to have XYZ. I'm just not interested.
Yeah. And those are behavioral boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. Those are behavioral boundaries. I think you're spot on.
So the flip side of that, though, is when we get rid of the negative people, but we need to cultivate, we need to recruit the positive people in our lives too, because they're just not going to show up on their own. And I'd love to hear how you think of that process. I'm a firm believer in the idea of the 5, right? The 5 people closest to you. You're the average of the 5 people closest to you. Some version of it is true. It is. And I bet a whole bunch of people are listening like, well, I mean, he was in the SEAL teams and it's in the word like teams, and it's natural there, but it can't be natural there because you're still human beings.
That's right.
Thrust into an environment together. But how do you, and then now as an entrepreneur and as a leadership consultant yourself, you're now learning a new set of skills. You're in a new environment. You're in a new threat environment than you were in the teams or in the FBI or in Afghanistan. The entrepreneurial space is a new threat environment for you. You must have at some point recently decided that you need people around you to level up that part of your game. What's your process like, and how do you recommend that people go about finding those positive relationships in life?
Yeah, this is going to sound like it's going to sound like I'm trying to make your episode and close it up perfectly, but it is. The answer is it's got to be your set of values, your self-leadership. If you don't know who you are and what you stand for, you can't possibly bring people into your life that are like-minded. That's the first thing, okay? So the work you need to do for yourself to say, who am I? Who is Errol Doebler, right? And like I said, I recommend you not, as much as I love being a husband and father, as morbid as it sounds, that could be taken away from me, whatever circumstance. So it's got to be, what do I stand for from a cultural standpoint, from a behavioral standpoint? What can I bring to bear as a husband, as a father, as a leadership consultant? The same thing all the time. I've got to know what that is. Okay. Now, I think the luckiest people in the world are people who can find 3 or 4 people who fall into that. That would be a lot. If you can find 3 or 4 people in your life that have the same values as you, that you can count on, that you can go to, you are a rich human being, because a lot of people can't find that many. So I think the first thing is expectations. Okay, who are you really going to allow yourself to be close to? Well, again, it starts with understanding who you are. And then when you find out those people, you got to hold on to them. Okay, now that doesn't mean everybody else who doesn't fall inside that gets shunned. It doesn't mean that at all. Okay, but when we're talking about who do we trust, who do we really put faith in, who could we really open the kimono to and say, here's how I'm feeling, here's what I did. I know I can trust you to not judge me and just listen. Here it is. Okay. You get one of those people in your life, you're pretty lucky. So I think managing the expectations about the quality of people in your life is important. It's not easy to find like-minded people that you can trust. Okay. I think everything after that is iterative around the superficiality of those relationships. Hey, this is a good guy. He's my daughter's, friend's dad, and he asked me to come over for a barbecue. He can be a little snarky sometimes. I don't really like the way he talks about, this person or that person, but you know what? On a whole, I can maintain who I am. I can be pleasant. I can not engage in those behaviors. And I think that's good, right? I can be a friend with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything I want. So that's kind of where I am on finding those people in your life. It's just no cliche that, if you can count more friends, than the fingers on your hands, and you don't have any friends, right? If you have too many friends, are you really that lucky that you found 15 people who share the exact same values? SEAL teams. Maybe there's a higher standard, generally speaking, of individual and human being and values, but there were people who just didn't like each other. The same platoon, on the same squad. They just didn't like each other. There was nothing you could do. Neither one of them did anything terrible. They just had a problem with each other. What are you going to do? It happens, right? Then you maintain your professionalism. Here's how we do business in this platoon. I don't care if you don't like somebody. You will be professional at all times, blah, 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 blah. So that's a tough one.
Yeah. And it's a hard one too, because, as cops, and this, like, you get into the job and you get into that hamster wheel of work, home, kids, those relationships tend to fall away as we go through our careers, and we really have to end up fighting for them or trying to get them back. And especially with non-cop friends, their lives move on in a very different direction than what a typical cop's life does. I think these days, it doesn't have to necessarily be a friend face to face, a person on your in your contact list, but there's so many good inputs out there in other ways. Even social media, for all of its drawbacks, can have a lot of positive influences on you. And there's a lot of resources out there that people can access. And if that's just you've never met the person, but if putting their voice into your ear, following on Instagram or Facebook or a podcast or whatever, if that helps you achieve another level, step up another level, it has the same effect, right?
100%.
Yeah. I know we're running over. I have a couple other questions. Do you have time to get?
Of course.
All right. So, those are the things we talked about, like that you really need to lead yourself. And we talked about self-awareness, kind of self-evaluation, goal setting, eliminating negativity, finding positivity. But I'm curious at this point, what are the things you use on a day-to-day basis, the tactics, strategies, the specific things you use to stay connected to that stuff. And I know that you are very much into the Wim Hof
Mm-hmm.
method as one thing, and you can explain that. But what are the things you use?
Look, this is going to sound like cheap promotion again. I use my own process. I developed it based on what I saw for myself and the successes. So, as a focus every day, right now, I am thinking discipline, prioritization, consistency, right? That's all in context to what I've got going on right now. Okay. So, but those are the three things. Again, when my wife and kids walk in here later, it's going to be discipline to be the husband and father I want to be, that I've decided who am, right? And all those things. So I'm constantly aware of the behaviors that I'm focused on. And I'm constantly aware of the emotions that I'm having that will take me away from those behaviors. That's my process. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I do, I have some routine that I do in the morning, right? Um, and those are good, right? Routines are excellent. Okay. But if I have to put random routine over stressing behaviors that I want to define myself in every aspect of my life, I take the behavior. So that's really where I hit my focus. And just on the Wim Hof method, right? It's cold exposure and breathing. I use, right, getting into an ice bath to practice those behaviors I want for every day of my life, among other things, right? I know the health benefits of getting into an ice bath. I need to prioritize that, okay, daily. I need to be disciplined because it's easy to say, not today. I need to do it consistently. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Once you start practicing those behaviors and other things, and the ice bath is a great way to do it, right? Because it's kind of so in your face, right? It reveals a lot about yourself, what you are willing and what you're not willing to do, and the excuses that you'll make. But anyway, I kind of got off point. Those are the things I focus on a day to day.
In those routines, because I think
Yep.
we find routines help with discipline,
Yep.
right? They help with consistency and all those things. What are the routines you try to maintain? Do you have a morning ritual or an evening ritual, or what's that look like?
I do, and they change, okay. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think, I used to be very much. I would wake up, okay. We've got a million dogs here, so I got to take care of the dogs first, right? So that's a part of a routine, but it's more of a job description. But I would immediately go to a minimum of 40 minutes of Wim Hof breathing, which is a very unique breathing method. And then I would go to cold exposure. I'd either have an ice bath or I'd get in a cold shower if I didn't have one available. Okay. And then that would start my day. There just comes a point where I'm like, I need my mornings for something else right now. Okay. I will do those things, but I'm going to have to fit them in later. And that's fine. I'll figure that out. Right now, right, the routine is, again, dogs are up. And now I'm walking the dogs. We're going for a mile walk minimum. Okay. I'll either listen to some type of educational book on tape or I'll be free with my thoughts. Okay. But before I do that, between getting the dogs taken care of and walking them, I'm going to journal. I'm going to write. And I'll either do my personal journal or, well, I do my personal journal and then I'll move to professional writing, whether it's a blog, whether it's ideas for a new book I'm working on. But that's where I am right now. So once the dog walk ends, now I'm just on to my day and what's kind of my priorities for the day and so on and so forth. And then the exercise and stuff, look, I'll fit it in. Okay. So I always have a routine, but I change it around based on how I'm feeling, what my needs are, and that type of thing.
On the journaling, do you use a blank journal and just write thoughts? Do you have a specific one that you use, some of the pre-prompted ones, or what do you do?
Yeah, so I've done journal. So I think the pre-prompted ones are great, right? Anything that helps you get in pen to paper, and I recommend pen to paper, not journaling on the computer. There's studies abound on the power of literally writing stuff down. I just use
Mm-hmm.
a blank journal, and I don't years ago when I started journaling, I used to put a lot of pressure on myself that it had to be something profound every day. And I realized it doesn't. Every now and then I've got 3 sentences. Boy, I had a really crappy night's sleep. My back is killing me. I got to figure out a way to be more disciplined in my yoga so my back isn't hurting. That might be it. It's something. Usually it leads to more. Okay. But I took the pressure off myself. I always thought it had to be so profound, and it doesn't. Just something. Because there will be days where you're like, wow, I've been writing for 45 minutes. Good. But you don't get to that unless you consistently are writing things down, even when it's hard, even when you've really got nothing to say. Now, sometimes I'm a blank page right now. I couldn't generate a thought if I had to. That's what I could tell you the date. I wrote that down in my journal. I got nothing to say. All right. I wrote it down. I journaled. I got nothing to say.
Yeah. That's funny. I go back and forth between journaling or journaling with prompts or journaling blank. I do a gratitude journal, which I find very helpful. And then I bounce back and forth between that and trying to have a meditation practice as well. But I do find the journaling will bring thoughts out very quickly, or things that are on my mind, and like, oh, that's interesting that popped up as I'm thinking about what to write or what to talk about. And I always encourage one of those 2 things for people as part of their morning practice is to journal. And I 100% agree. Pen to paper, it's completely different than typing something on a blog or knocking something into your phone in an app. It's like sitting with that binded book and writing is really important.
I don't know. I know that there are studies out there that show the benefits of it. I've never dug that deep into it, but just from an experiential level, it's absolutely true. And
Well,
again,
and what
that
I
walk,
value.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and the walk with the dogs after the journaling, those days where I got nothing to say, I go for a walk, and I'm like, really, you have no thoughts? And now, right, that has prompted me to say, well, you can get some thoughts, for God's sakes. Something. What's your day going to do? What are you going to prioritize today? Right? How are you going to behave today? Something. But at a minimum, that pen to paper led me to at least reflect on something as I walk. So it is invaluable.
Yeah. Errol, this a great discussion about leading ourselves before we can lead other people, the people that mean something in our lives. Really loved your insights. Where can people learn more about you, your company, and what you're doing, and some of the things that you have out there for them?
Yeah. So I appreciate that. So my company is Leader 193, leader193.com. I feel like we've got a pretty good website. You look at it, you'll understand what we do and what we have to offer. I write blogs all the time. So if you liked what you heard here, say, let's see what else this guy has to say. I've got a book that's available as well. That really, it's a very academic book, for lack of a better term. I really break down my process, and I use good, fun stories to reiterate where they came from and things like that. So it's an entertaining read, but it's also a very structural read. I am a Wim Hof practitioner, unique breathing and cold exposure. So you can learn more about what that is and how I apply it to our leadership process with clients. We're pretty excited right now. We just launched our online academy. It is literally, generally speaking, I put people through an 8-week program. We break down each one of the elements of my process that we talked about. They are broken down into short videos for each element. Okay. And then the only thing that's missing is the one-on-one calls. That's what makes it very affordable. So we just launched that. So if you liked what you heard here, I think we're charging $250 for lifetime access to the series, which is a pretty good deal. And then we want to offer your audience. We're going to give them a coupon code, for the next couple of weeks. Use that coupon code, get 20% off. So that's the big thing we're promoting right now. I do open retreats. We've got one here in just outside of Aspen, Colorado, November 11th through 13th, where we'll be talking about all the things we talked about today. We'll be applying it to the cold exposure, to the breathing, and all sorts of other things that we do. And it's a very powerful weekend. So if you're interested in that, take a look. And so that's it in a nutshell, what we got going on.
That's great. Well, thank you for the coupon code. We'll put links to your website and everything there in the show notes for this episode. So if you're listening, you can just scroll down and find that. If you're listening on the website, you can find the show notes at thesquadroom.net as well. And Errol, thank you. That a lot of fun to talk about these things. I can nerd out on all of these topics individually, but particularly all the self-awareness stuff. So, lots of fun to come into this kind of blind with you and just roll with it. And it was a great episode. So thanks for being with us.
I appreciate it, Garrett. And this is a very important community to me for obvious reasons that you're serving. So I really hope that everybody got something out of it, and they'll all know how to contact me if they want, based on the show notes. So I hope I hear from somebody, but thank you for inviting me on the show, and keep up the great work. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show, make sure you check through our catalog of episodes, because you're going to find some amazing guests and some great actionable ideas you can take into your day. Also, I want to offer you something I'm very excited about, and it's absolutely free. It's my Tactical Tuesday newsletter. Every Tuesday, I want to bring you a few tactics, tips, and strategies to help you succeed in the week ahead. It may be a book I want to share, some gear I found useful, an inspiring quote, or anything else I think you'd like. To sign up for the Tactical Tuesday email list, you can visit thesquadroom.net/Tactical Tuesdays, or just text your email address to 805-364-2331. That's 805-364-2331. If you didn't catch that, check the show notes for this episode, and you can find it there. And I promise we won't sell or spam your email address. Before we wrap up, I have a challenge for you. If you got something out of this episode, if you were inspired by our conversation today, I want to challenge you right now to take a photo of your podcast player as you're playing this episode, and I want you to share it with 3 friends, people who you think need to hear what we talked about today. Send them this episode and recommend that they listen to it. Also, please consider leaving a review on the podcast player of your choice. If you have a few seconds, please leave a comment with your review, because it really helps us spread the word about the show, and it helps more cops find the valuable lessons that we have here. Also, join us on Facebook at our Facebook group, follow our page, and on Instagram at The Squad Room. A special thanks to today's sponsor, OfficerPrivacy.com. If cleaning up your name on the internet and making it harder for criminals to find you is important, check them out at OfficerPrivacy.com/The Squad Room, where their deal for you as a listener of this show is they'll give you a free USB data blocker and 1 month of free monitoring when you sign up. I want to thank our sponsor for this episode, InTime. InTime is a state-of-the-art, easy-to-use, and incredibly simple way to schedule shifts, improve subpoena compliance, reduce officer fatigue, and manage special events, and much more. Make sure to check them out at intime.com/The Squad Room to learn more about their affordable and simple solutions for public safety. Also, there are some other great companies who support the podcast and support you as well. Go to thesquadroom.net/support to see exclusive deals from Signature Coins, Hard to Kill Fitness, Onnit, Ranger Up, Hardhead Veterans, and Audible. And if you're looking for the best fitting ballistic helmet that exceeds NIJ standards and won't break the bank, check out hardheadveterans.com and use the coupon code SQUADROOM to get $20 off your helmet. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.